Hello, good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the world you're dialing in from. My name is Celine Floyd. I'm one of the directors of the Catfinity Talent Practice, and welcome to our 28th episode of Lead Strong. For those of you who are regular listeners, you will have noticed that I am flying solo today. My right-hand woman, Stephanie Hopper, is unfortunately poorly, so I feel a bit like I've lost a limb, but I'm going to try to do my best to honour the razzmatazz of Steph in this session. And luckily, I am joined by two wonderful guests, Emily and Jean, and I'm sure we'll have a really wonderful conversation together. So just a little bit about Catfinity. We are a strengths-based organisation working in talent acquisition and talent management for numerous organisations across various sectors. We have offices in the UK, Australia and America, and we're currently engaged with about 250 clients in 80 countries. I heard that stat last week and thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So we specialise in strengths-based assessment and development for all levels in an organisation, from apprentice all the way up to exec and board level. And as I said, I am one of the co-directors of the talent practice, specialising more in the talent management space. And so today we have a really interesting topic, which is looking at self-belief and leadership, and what it means in terms of being an effective leader. So I'm really excited because I think it's a topic that really permeates, doesn't it? So many situations and so many of us. And as I said, I'm delighted again that we've got two wonderful guests. So Emily and Jean, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I wonder if perhaps Emily first, you could tell the audience a little bit more about you and your experience and why you're passionate about the topic of leadership generally.
Yeah, well, thanks, Celine, and don't worry, you're not alone. We are here to help today. So I'm Emily Saltmer. I started my Emily Saltmer Limited business in January. So I'm on an interesting journey and just becoming an independent coach and consultant, having worked 20 years in the corporate world. So I worked for the likes of Unilever, Legal & General, HSBC, more recently Experian, so really big corporate organizations. But my early career, kind of first 8 years of my career, was actually leading and managing recruitment teams. And I think that's where I really found my passion and curiosity for leadership, because I was kind of like thrown into management. I had a very well supported organization that gave us lots of training, but I really hadn't thought about it as a career. I hadn't really thought about who I was and how I would show up as a leader. So, I had a very humble start in life and didn't really have any real major role models around leadership. So my career and my inspiration was from the directors and managers that I worked with. And it was when I worked with a great director who did some training with us, and I realized that, we can intentionally change the way in which we lead to inspire, engage and motivate others. And I also, I always wanted to be better at what I was doing. So I just had this natural curiosity. I also had a psychology background. So I'm also an occupational psychologist. I'm a qualified coach now. And I also am a certified fitness instructor. I have training in anatomy and physiology. And so today, my approach working with clients is coaching the whole person, really taking a strengths-based approach, but it's really trying to understand how individuals can turn up and be their best selves. And that's just not a mindset thing. That's also a physical thing, is that you can actually intentionally change your physiology so that you can feel better, feel stronger and more confident, which is a great connection to the topic today. So I'm really excited.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I love this notion of intentionally changing behaviour. I was at a client site on Monday, actually, and I was saying, the really successful leaders, often that's not by chance. It's not some kind of magic that they're leveraging there. It's through hard work. And yeah, I love the multiple hats that you wear and how you bring them together. Thank you, Emily. Wonderful to have you with us. And Jean, hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So lovely to meet you and have you here. Perhaps you could do the same, introduce yourself and why you're passionate about leadership.
Yes, of course. And I'm listening with fascination to Emily. Sounds fantastic, the journey you're on. And so close as well in terms of thinking about self-belief for you, given just starting in your own business. So I've been working for myself for a little bit longer. I'm Jean Burke. I'm an executive coach and a psychotherapist by training. And much of the work I do is in the NHS and healthcare, so kind of high stress, high stakes environments. And my focus tends to be on workplace well-being and creating the conditions for people to thrive. Easier said than done in those environments, but we try. Why am I passionate about leadership? Probably for very similar reasons to Emily, but also from a very practical point of view. I've been on the receiving end and worked in organizations where leadership has been poor. And I was reflecting, thinking about our session today, that it has caused me to leave organizations where I've actually thought, you know what, this is just not getting the best out of me. I'm not thriving. I know I can do better work than this. But because of the leadership I was experiencing, I felt shut down as a consequence. So just the converse of that is that I equally know how much I thrive when I experience good leadership. And I still see that in my independent consultancy work, that when I'm working with a good leader, gosh, I show up in a completely different way. They show up in a different way, and it makes for some really exciting work. So I guess that's my starting point and why I'm interested and passionate about it.
Wonderful, thank you. And again, love the multiple hats, and your psychotherapy expertise and experience must be really fascinating, and I'm sure will lend a really interesting lens to this discussion. And brilliant the work that you do in the NHS. So we've had guests on in this series with that kind of exposure. It's just been a real privilege to hear about the work that's been done there. So brilliant. Let's get stuck into the conversation. So self-belief, when we're looking at leaders or working with leaders from an assessment or development perspective, it's one of those kind of anchors, isn't it? It's one of the driving pieces within them often, and as you just described, the ramifications of it can be huge. And obviously we've done a lot of research over the years around strengths, and globally and across multiple industries. And one of the really interesting pieces that came out of research we did last year was showing that self-belief, which is one of the strengths in our strengths profile tool, came through as being one of the most common unrealized strengths for people. So unrealized being this notion of something that people have perhaps deep within them, but just aren't having the opportunity or the wherewithal to kind of leverage it properly. So it's a bit of an untapped source of extra kind of performance and effectiveness in people, is what our research is showing. And I was reading some research a couple of weeks ago published by the HBR actually, that was looking at self-confidence and the impact of leaders having self-confidence on obviously performance, but also like levels of positivity and resilience and their ability to take risks. And I was pondering about how that was aligning to us in this kind of post-pandemic world, and how quickly things are changing, and this sense of optimism being important. So I think in summary for me, it's a really trending topic at the moment, and it's quite complex, isn't it, because it's multi-layered. So perhaps in the first instance we can kick off the conversation with the very simple question of why we think it's important for leaders to have self-belief in the first place. And Jean, if I may come back to you first for your perspective on that.
Sure, and I guess it links, my initial thought is linked to what you've just been talking about. I mean, organizations these days and teams within those organizations are just operating in such complex environments, and not just complex, but rapidly changing environments. And I think it's impossible to have all the answers. It's people are having to walk new paths every day. And my goodness, we've seen that over the last 2 years, haven't we? None of us had the roadmap or the playbook for how to lead in a pandemic times. And for me, that's where self-belief needs to show up, actually, that you need to have the comfort or trust in yourself to kind of operate and navigate through that ambiguous environment that people are having to work with in these days. There just isn't something you can pull off the shelf and go, oh yeah, here's one I prepared earlier. It's for those reasons that I think it's important. Yeah. And you're right, it shows up in when I'm doing strengths-based coaching work, it's often in the unrealized box with people. And since you asked me to participate in this in the last couple of weeks, I can't begin to tell you how many times it's shown up in the coaching work I'm doing. I mean, like, hang on a minute, has this what's going on here? That's what we're talking about. Now, that might be because it's front of mind for me, but it's definitely there with my clients as well.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see that come through, and that, as I say, it's globally, so it's across different countries and parts of the world that is an ongoing trend. I love this notion of there being this lack of these things that you can pull down and pulls. Actually, it's about working from within and leaning into that. That absolutely makes a lot of sense. And Emily, does that echo your views on why it's important for leaders to have this self-belief?
Yeah, and I also notice this particularly with new managers or leaders that are just sort of transitioning quite early in their career, and often there's a desire for a rule book, like I want to know things sort of black and white, 1 + 1 = 2. But actually, when it comes to leadership, there's so much ambiguity. There are great, shades of grey, and a lot of what you end up working with leaders is actually coming back to values and beliefs, and having a real clear sense of why are they doing what are they doing to help lead some decisions and direction, rather than it being. And that actually is quite interesting because it comes from a real then personal space as well as from maybe an organizational context. And I love this link also to then how that brings up the kind of diversity debate about inclusion and how do you create a narrative so that everybody feels included, because the beliefs that you have and that you share will obviously impact the people that you're leading. So yes, it touches so many different topics. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in your experience, Emily, what does kind of self-belief kind of look like in leaders? So when you see that in action, what are you seeing successful leaders kind of do?
I mean, there's been so many times in my career where I don't think I've worked for any organisation that isn't going through change transformation. And like you said, particularly the last 2 years has been really quite telling of how leaders show up and deal without any sort of rule book. No one had gone through the COVID pandemic experience. From a UK perspective, we were also experiencing Brexit. So the political landscape was shifting as well. The economic landscape was shifting, and we're now in a kind of war situation as well. So I think there is a lot of pressure on leaders right now, and the leaders that I probably notice have strong self-belief, it is about how they think about things. They have real focus, clarity. They're calm, but you also see it physically in how they turn up and show up. Those leaders are really looking after themselves, because this tie and this link to resilience is that if you're really rooted in your self-belief, you need to do work on yourself to be able to turn up every day and be that best self. So how people physically look, how they hold themselves when they're making a decision, sharing an opinion, holding a view. If we're in a situation where there isn't the right or wrong, it's not as clear, you've got to believe in what you're saying, and that has to come with a level of confidence, clarity, and focus. I think those are, for me, are kind of some key words, attributes I would call out.
Yeah, and I love this. For years, I've been kind of thinking about emotional intelligence as being a three-pronged thing, around like emotional, like empathy, emotional insight, and then the sense of emotional stability. And you're reminding me, Emily, when you were speaking about that, of leaders being a source of stability for those around them. And actually, one of the precursors to that, arguably, is having this sense of self-belief in oneself so that you can kind of retain that composure. And I think often leaders are surprised, aren't they, by the degree of scrutiny that they're under and the impact that they can have. Jean, fascinated to hear from your perspective there in terms of people that you've worked with, what self-belief has looked like for those leaders that you've seen that have had that.
I think I'll probably echo quite a bit of what Emily says. I don't think it's the all-knowing leader. We can't have the all-knowing leader anymore. But those I see who have self-belief and display it, they've done the work on themselves. Is what I notice is different. They have an ability to reflect. They've got a high degree of self-awareness, and with that self-awareness comes not just a knowledge of their strengths and what they excel at, but also they understand their shadow side. They understand what they're like when they're not at their best, which really kind of links to what Emily is saying about, you have to be grounded, you have to be looking after yourself. I really think alarm bells start to chime for me when I hear people talking, and I recognize it's a challenge, but when they're not looking after themselves and they're saying, well, focusing on my well-being is not possible right now. And the reason for that for me is if you think back to some of the, I think it's the WHO definition of burnout. One of the elements in the WHO definition of burnout is we start to lack self-efficacy, which speaks to a lack of self-belief. And the reason we lack that is because we're working too hard. We're not doing the personal work on ourselves to stay grounded, to stay well, to stay healthy. So it's multifaceted, and it takes work. Yeah.
And do you see, Jean, in your work that you can get into a bit of a spiral there? It's in Emily too, I guess, the less you're focusing on that self-care, the less likely you are to then focus on it. Do you see that kind of spiral effect, Jean?
Well, I think what I have heard, the narrative that people give me sometimes is, well, I survived that. I was under pressure and I delivered there. But there's a question about the quality of the work and how the teams felt that were working with you. What was the experience on the receiving end? And, if I managed that, surely I can manage this. But, we're not... we're not an infinite bundle of energy and capability. At some point, something has to give. I think it would be my response to that one. I don't know what you think about that, Emily, what your reflection.
Yeah, there's loads of things going on in my head at the moment. I think one of them is the word surviving. I mean, gosh, one of the reasons I started my own business is, on a personal front, that got a bit of a mantra for me and people that were working around me. And I was like, gosh, I don't want to be working and surviving. I want to be thriving. I want to be enjoying what I'm doing, because that absolutely has a direct impact on the people around you at home and at work. And I think when you become a leader, it's really acknowledging the impact that you're having on yourself and the people around you. And it will, I think I find a lot of leaders are very optimistic and very resilient. I'd love to see how that comes out in your strengths assessments, but generally the leaders I've come across are hugely resilient and optimistic. But there is this, there's the duration of that pressure and the continuity of it. If we think back now 4 years, we've had Brexit, pandemic, which hasn't gone away. None of those two things have gone away. We've got a war going on in Europe, and I think there's also all the other challenges that leaders face that equally haven't gone away. So I think it's like, I wonder how far people are prepared to go. And I think it does come back to your belief reservoir around, you know, and unlinking that to your values. Like, you know, what do I want as a leader? Who do I want to become? How do I want to continue my legacy? And what impact does that have on the people around me? Because I know your last topic was on the shadow, you know, leaders. And I think it's so critical to this, is that you can't talk about the two topics separately. I think as a leader, it's acknowledging that you do have a role where people are going to be looking to you. And, I think coming back to your beliefs and how you perceive things. The separate point as well, like just to sort of bring up a separate thing, was that I think there's self-belief around maybe tasks and activities that we do day to day. In some areas have, you know, consistently strong self-belief on things, and then there's other areas sometimes where we can go, oh, I don't believe I can do this. And it's really kind of digging into that mindset and belief system around how you can transfer your experiences and know that you are, you know, capable to make choices and almost take away that kind of self-doubt. But there's an interesting balance as well around self-belief day to day versus broadly as a leader and how I show up and perform.
Yeah, it's a real tightrope, isn't it? And I was thinking about that tightrope in preparation for this episode, because in my mind there's almost like the two tightropes that we're walking. It's like how we're presenting our self-belief to others, and that balance between be confident and arrogant, and overly confident. And I love, Jean, what you were saying earlier about actually effective self-belief involves self-awareness and an awareness of where we're not so strong, and that's part of it, which can seem counterintuitive. So yeah, in my mind, that's kind of tightrope one. And then the second tightrope is this flip-flop between believing in myself but then having self-doubt. And there was an article again that I read a couple of months ago, which was quite striking. And Jean, in your line of work, you're probably more familiar with it. But I read that we can, at any one time, have 70% of our thoughts be more negative, you know, negative thoughts about ourselves and the world and kind of what's happening, which is quite astonishing that actually the majority of thoughts would be of that nature. And so when you look at that, it's a wonder how any of us, you know, have got that self-belief. And
I think there's something as well, though, isn't there? What we're not talking about here is the absence of vulnerability. That's just coming up for me when you were speaking. That this is not about, you know, not being vulnerable. It's not about not showing that you don't know the way to go. Being, going back to what Emily was saying earlier, it's being, you know, sure enough of yourself and thinking about you as a whole person rather than just a thinking body, thinking part of you, that actually you can trust yourself to get through something despite there being a challenge.
And you know, what advice do you have, Jean, for people, you know, when you do experience that sense of your self-belief being challenged? You know, what can help there from your perspective?
From my perspective, owning the fact that I'm work in progress on this one, Celine, definitely self-compassion.
Yeah.
You know, actually, you know, recognizing your humanity, that you can get things wrong, that, you know, everybody does make mistakes, that we have days that are not as good as other days, and it's okay to be vulnerable. Acknowledging, as I said, I'm a work in progress on that one. I think taking time out, going back to doing stuff that you're good at. If we think about that task orientation that Emily was talking about, just you know, reminding yourself of where you have efficacy. Going to the evidence base that says you're good at what you do, and having cheerleaders as well, I think is important.
I was going to that was a kind of couple of points, Jean. I was thinking about as well is actually, you know, where we do have self-doubt about our own ability or our own confidence, is how do you pull in the people around you?
Yeah.
And actually that is a show of vulnerability, that, you know, you're acknowledging that you're not going to be amazing at everything, but you do believe you can get through this with the people and support around you. So you know, reaching out to that network, having that mentorship, having that management team around you that can support you through the big decisions and the challenges that you face as a leader. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a really fascinating discussion. As always, I feel like we could, especially with this topic, we could definitely fill a good couple of days with just talking about it. Because as you said, it touches so many areas. I think the thing I've been most struck by through the conversation is, again, this notion of being a leader is around balancing multiple things in tandem. A lot of our conversation has been around the misconception that self-belief means unfiltered confidence and you know, thinking that you have to be the perfect entity, and actually probably the opposite is true, that strong self-belief comes from knowing oneself, accepting oneself, wanting to continue to develop and grow, but actually making peace with all the facets of your personality and who you are. And we know from the research that, you know, this notion of authentic leadership is really powerful, and in order to be authentic, one often has to show some degree of vulnerability. So definitely a complex topic. We've talked a lot around, as I say, this idea of working on self and self-reflection. And Emily, you were talking about the whole person, you know, the holistic person, and that is very important. And also this notion of us all being, to some degree, in this period of survival lately, with everything that's going on in the world. And Jean, you're referencing the you know, the work by WHO around burnout, and that actually that isn't sustainable. So yeah, it's been really wonderful. I would be really keen just to hear from each of you your parting words, or your parting reflections on this complex topic. Jean, I'll come to you first. What final nuggets have you got?
Probably something about creating a thinking space for people. We're so busy doing. And actually just taking the time to pause and log, to reflect on what you are achieving, because I think that helps with the self-belief, you know, particularly when there's so much coming at you. So creating that space to do that on a regular basis.
Well, thank you. And Emily?
Yeah, I mean, taking that time out, that space to think is absolutely critical right now. If you're not prioritizing that, I don't know, you can't offer any more advice in that space, because without it, I think we're so close to being in situations where we're under high pressure, and we can't see the wood for the trees, if you like. We end up in a fog. So mentally, we need to create space to create clarity and focus. I do also think that if you are in a space of self-doubt, not believing in yourself, that's impacting your confidence. It's kind of doing that work, even if it's going out to other people and trying to identify, you know, some examples that you can line up in different situations and go, if I did that, then how can I apply that same skill set, those strengths in this situation that I'm facing today? So yeah, looking at those other experiences and using the people around you to support you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Amazing advice from you both. I'm sure everyone listening is wishing that we could continue to get regular nuggets from both of you, tips and hints on how to tackle this. But thank you for everything that you shared and all of your insights. Really brilliant conversation. Thank you to everyone that's listened in. We will be back, hopefully again as a duo, with 2 more fantastic guests in 2 weeks' time for our 29th episode. In the meantime, wishing you a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week. Keep working on that self-belief, and we will see you soon. Thank you, Jean and Emily. Thank you.
Thank you.